Pink Floyd did not break up with a scream or a final fight that shook the world. It ended quietly, through tension that had been building for years, through words said in frustration and silences that said even more. Roger Waters still remembers that day clearly, not because of what was spoken, but because of what finally became impossible to ignore. For him, it was not just the end of a band. It was the collapse of a shared dream that once felt unbreakable. Pink Floyd was once more than a band. It was a creative family that pushed music into places no one had ever dared to explore before. And Roger Waters remembers those early days as a time when ambition felt pure and excitement came naturally. Back then, there was no talk of power, ownership, or control, only a desire to experiment with sound and express ideas that felt bigger than ordinary songs. Roger often recalls how the band felt united after Syd Barrett's departure, bonded by loss and driven by the need to prove they could survive and evolve together. As success arrived, everything changed slowly but deeply, and Roger Waters believes this was the moment where cracks began to form beneath the surface. Albums like The Dark Side of the Moon did not just bring fame, they brought pressure, expectations, and a growing sense that Pink Floyd was no longer just about music but about maintaining a massive global machine. Roger stepped forward creatively because he felt someone had to steer the ship, and while his leadership helped shape the band's most iconic work, it also created distance between him and the others. Roger has often said that his increasing control was not about ego, but about responsibility, because he felt the band was losing direction and needed strong ideas to survive in a changing musical world. He poured his personal thoughts, fears, and political ideas into the lyrics, believing Pink Floyd should stand for something meaningful rather than becoming comfortable or predictable. However, David Gilmour began to feel that the balance was shifting too far, that his musical voice was being limited, and that the band was slowly becoming centered around one man's vision. The tension became impossible to hide during the creation of Animals, an album Roger still sees as one of Pink Floyd's most honest statements, but also one of the most divisive internally. Roger felt frustrated that others were not contributing enough, while David felt that his ideas were being dismissed before they could fully grow. What once felt like collaboration now felt like negotiation, and every session carried an unspoken heaviness that none of them wanted to admit openly. When work began on The Wall, Roger believed he was creating something deeply personal and necessary, a story about isolation, control, and emotional collapse that reflected his own state of mind. He felt that Pink Floyd needed this album to survive creatively, even if it meant pushing harder than ever before. David, on the other hand, saw The Wall as a Pink Floyd album that should still reflect the band as a whole, not just one person's internal struggles, and this difference in perspective fueled even more resentment. Roger remembers how decisions became faster and harsher during this time, because he felt there was no room left for hesitation or compromise. The pressure of massive tours, deadlines, and expectations made him believe that only strict control could keep the project together. Others experienced this control as suffocating, especially Richard Wright, who Roger felt was no longer contributing at the level required, leading to decisions that permanently damaged relationships within the band. The Wall tour itself became a symbol of everything that was wrong, as Roger later reflected, because the physical wall built on stage mirrored the emotional walls separating the band members. Night after night, they performed behind barriers, rarely connecting with each other as musicians or friends. Roger has admitted that even while standing in command of such a powerful production, he felt deeply alone and disconnected from the people who once felt like brothers. By the time the final cut came into existence, Roger no longer believed Pink Floyd functioned as a true band, and he approached the project with the mindset of completing a final statement rather than reviving unity. David felt increasingly sidelined, sensing that his role had been reduced and that creative discussions were no longer genuine exchanges. The atmosphere in the studio was cold, strained, and filled with unspoken resentment that everyone carried silently. Roger recalls the exact moment when he realized Pink Floyd was finished. It was not during an argument or dramatic confrontation, but during a calm realization that nothing could be repaired anymore. He felt that the emotional bond was gone, that trust had been eroded beyond repair, and that continuing under the same name would only lead to more bitterness. To him, Ending Pink Floyd felt like an act of honesty rather than defeat. When Roger announced his departure in 1985, he truly believed that Pink Floyd would end with him because he felt the creative heart of the band had already stopped beating. He did not see this as abandonment, but as closure, a necessary step to move forward artistically and emotionally. What shocked him deeply was the decision by David Gilmour and Nick Mason to continue using the Pink Floyd name, a choice Roger interpreted as betrayal rather than survival. Roger remembers the anger and disbelief that followed, as legal battles replaced conversations and friendship was reduced to contracts and courtrooms. He felt erased from the story he helped write, watching the band continue without him while audiences around the world accepted a new version of Pink Floyd. That pain, Roger admits, never fully faded because it touched something deeper than music. It touched identity and legacy. To this day, Roger recalls the split not as a single event, but as the final collapse of years of unresolved tension, misunderstood intentions, and emotional distance. He believes that the band did not end because of hatred, but because they lost the ability to truly listen to one another. The day Pink Floyd split remains one of the most painful memories of his life, not because of what he lost professionally, but because of what was lost personally and can never be rebuilt. David Gilmour has never been the type to shout his anger loudly, but those who understand him know that his silence often carries more weight than words. And when it comes to Roger Waters, that silence has lasted for decades. While Roger openly talks about the breakup and his feelings, David has always chosen a quieter path, one shaped by disappointment rather than drama. For David, the pain was not just about losing creative freedom. It was about losing respect within a band he once believed stood for equality and shared expression. David remembers the years leading up to the split as a slow erosion of trust, where every album made him feel more like a hired musician than a founding member of a legendary band. He felt that his musical instincts, which once helped define Pink Floyd's sound, were increasingly questioned or ignored, not because they lacked quality, but because they did not fully align with Roger's growing need for control. This feeling of being pushed aside did not explode suddenly. It settled quietly and painfully, leaving scars that time could not easily heal. One of the deepest grudges David carries comes from how creative decisions were handled, especially during albums like The Wall and The Final Cut, where discussion often felt one-sided rather than collaborative. David has hinted in interviews that he felt trapped in an environment where disagreement was seen as disloyalty, and where raising concerns only led to more tension instead of understanding. Over time, this created a sense that his role had been reduced to execution rather than creation, something that deeply conflicted with his identity as an artist. The removal of Richard Wright left a lasting impact on David's perception of Roger because it symbolized how far control had gone within the band. David believed that forcing a longtime bandmate out during one of their biggest projects crossed a line that could not be ignored, and it made him question whether loyalty still mattered in Pink Floyd. Even years later, this moment remains a quiet source of resentment, because it showed David that power had replaced partnership. When Roger left the band and assumed Pink Floyd would naturally end, David felt abandoned rather than relieved, because he believed the band still had life and meaning beyond one person. From David's perspective, Roger did not just leave. He declared the band creatively dead and expected everyone else to accept that judgment without question. That assumption deeply offended David because it dismissed the contributions and emotional investment of the remaining members as if they no longer mattered. The legal battle over the Pink Floyd name hardened David's feelings more than almost anything else, because what could have been resolved privately turned into a public fight that damaged reputations and trust. David felt that Roger's insistence on ownership ignored the reality that Pink Floyd had always been a collective effort, even when leadership shifted over time. Being forced to defend the band's right to exist felt like an unnecessary war that replaced friendship with bitterness. As Pink Floyd continued without Roger, David faced the pressure of proving that the band could survive creatively, and this burden came with its own emotional weight. Every success was compared to the past, and every criticism carried the shadow of Roger's absence. David has admitted that this period was not easy, because while he believed in the music they were making, he was constantly reminded of unresolved conflict that followed him everywhere. Roger's public comments over the years added fuel to the fire, especially when they questioned the artistic legitimacy of Pink Floyd after his departure. David took these remarks personally, not because of ego, but because they undermined the hard work and dedication he poured into keeping the band alive. To David, these comments felt less like honest opinions and more like attempts to control the narrative long after the split. When the band briefly reunited for Live 8, fans saw it as a sign of healing, but for David, it was more of a respectful gesture than a true reconciliation. He agreed to perform not because old wounds had healed, but because the moment felt bigger than personal pain. However, once the stage lights faded, the underlying issues remained untouched, proving that shared history alone was not enough to repair broken trust. David has often suggested that what hurts most is not what Roger did, but what Roger never fully acknowledged, because apology without understanding feels empty. He believes that Roger still frames the breakup mainly through his own pain, without fully recognizing how deeply others were affected by his leadership style. This lack of mutual acknowledgement keeps the grudge alive, because closure cannot exist without shared responsibility. Another source of lingering resentment comes from the way legacy is discussed, as David feels protective of Pink Floyd's image and musical identity. He believes that constantly revisiting old conflicts in public interviews keeps the wounds open and prevents fans from simply enjoying the music without emotional baggage. To David, preserving the band's dignity matters more than revisiting past arguments, and this difference in approach creates further distance between him and Roger. Social media and modern interviews have only intensified these feelings. The statements can spread instantly and be interpreted harshly by millions. David sees this as unnecessary exposure of private pain, while Roger sees it as honesty and expression. This clash in values reinforces why forgiveness has been so difficult, because they no longer share the same understanding of boundaries or respect. David also carries a quiet sadness beneath the grudge, because he remembers the early days when collaboration felt natural and exciting. Those memories make the present reality harder to accept, because they remind him of what was lost not to fate, but to choices. Holding on to that loss makes letting go of resentment feel like letting go of the truth itself. Over time, David's grudge has become less about anger and more about self-protection, because reopening emotional wounds offers no reward. He has learned that peace sometimes comes from distance, not reconciliation, and that forcing forgiveness can feel dishonest. From his point of view, moving forward without Roger is not an act of spite, but an act of survival. Roger believes grudges should fade with time, but David believes time only deepens understanding, and understanding does not always lead to forgiveness. He sees the past clearly now, without the pressure of success or deadlines, and that clarity confirms many of the feelings he once suppressed. Accepting those emotions has become part of who he is today. In the end, David Gilmour still holds grudges not because he enjoys conflict, but because some wounds were never treated properly when they first appeared. Respect was lost, trust was broken, and communication failed when it mattered most. For David, forgiveness without accountability would feel like rewriting history, and that is something he is not willing to do. The tragedy of Pink Floyd is not that it ended, but that the people who created something timeless could never find a way to truly heal together. Roger Waters recalls the split with sorrow and conviction, while David Gilmour carries quiet resentment shaped by years of disappointment. Their music continues to unite generations, but behind that unity lies a story of unresolved pain that still lingers, reminding the world that even legends are shaped by human flaws.